This is better than a booster, a monthly series where I recommend cards that cost less than a booster pack to buy. So $5 or less. And I'm going to be starting with a bunch of Wilds of Eldraine Enchanting Tales, because there were so many good reprints in here that are worth picking up. First, Fiery Emancipation. 6 mana for an enchantment that triples the damage of your stuff. This card's so good. It's like a Craterhoof Behemoth in red. You play it and it basically triples the power of your creatures. But it's not just buffing creatures. It also buffs any burn type damage you have. Or if you play it in tandem with cards like Brash Taunter or any other red source that tacks on damage, it can be really crazy. If you deal 3 damage to a Brash Taunter, it gets tripled to 9, and then that 9 from the Brash Taunter gets tripled again. So it basically cubes the damage that you do. Fiery Emancipation is a super awesome big red finisher, and it's only $3. Every other printing is between $12 and $30, so I don't expect this to stay at $3 for long. It's probably going to creep up. Get it now. Polluted Bonds is another really sweet enchantment. Originally only having 1 printing in Shadowmoor, this Enchanting Tales version is down to just $1.40. And the alt art is pretty cheap too. It's like $3. 5 mana for a black enchantment that says whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, that player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this very easily can be gaining you 6 life a turn cycle, because each player is probably going to play their land draw. But it gets better because it doesn't say play a land, it says when a land enters. So fetch lands will trigger this twice. Any green ramp spell also triggers this. If your opponent is a landfall deck, this might actually just take them out of the game. It's a must-kill threat for any lands deck. Plus, it has synergy with Ghost Quarter type effects, which is pretty sweet. If you haven't played against Polluted Bonds, it gains a lot of life really quickly and is just a strong card overall. I think it's pretty underrated, and now that it got reprinted, I'm definitely picking up a copy, and I'm going to recommend the same. Unnatural Growth is another card that got reprinted here that is pretty strong. The Wilds of Eldraine printing is about $2. It's green, 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 green 1 for an enchantment, so you might want to be very green heavy if you're going to play this card. But at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control. So not only does it just make your stuff huge and it's great for attacking, but because it says each combat, that means during your opponent's turn, your creatures also have double the power and toughness, meaning it lets you play defense really well. This card's a great finisher, and if you're in any deck that has a reasonable amount of creatures with vigilance, then it can let you play the offense-defense game really well. Very strong in lots of green decks. Anything that goes wide with something more than 1/1s, doubling a 1/1 to a 2/2 is kind of meh, but if you're playing like a lot of like 3/3s or 4/4s, turning those into 6/6s and 8/8s can finish off a game. It's a pretty good card. Here's another great green card that didn't have many printings, 1 in Shadowmoor and 1 Secret Lair, but Prismatic Omen is a awesome card. Green and 1 for an enchantment. Lands you control are every basic land type, in addition to their other types. So it's perfect color fixing. If you're in a 4/5 3-color deck, it just fixes all your mana for only 2 mana, which is pretty nice. But it also turns them into lands of every type, meaning your non-basics count as mountains for Valakut, or they count as swamps for Cabal Coffers. If you're in a 2-color deck and you utilize cards like Valakut or Cabal Coffers or anything else that cares about the land type, turning all your utility lands into your land type is pretty awesome. It doesn't go in every deck, but if you do have a deck that wanted Prismatic Omen but you didn't want to pay the $15, it's down to 1, so pick it up now. Shared Animosity. Another card from the original Lorwyn era. 2 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a type with it. So if you're some sort of red tribal deck, goblins, dwarves, something that has a lot of dudes, if you attack with 5 creatures, you can give them all +5/+0, which is pretty good. But I think it doesn't go in just tribal decks. You can totally play this in token decks. A lot of times token decks will often make similar types of tokens. Like you have a token generator that makes soldiers or cats or whatever. And then this just becomes a finisher, turning 10 1/1s into 11 ones can definitely knock 1 or 2 players out of the game. And not giving them toughness doesn't matter too much for token decks because you're just going to make more of those things anyway. This card's under $1 now, and if you haven't picked one up yet, maybe this is the time. Okay, last enchantment I'm going to talk about. I know these have all been enchantments so far. Wasn't intentional, but Mirrormade is another great enchantment. It's from the original Throne of Eldraine, and it's still under $5. Just $1.60 for the cheapest printing. Blue 1 for an enchantment. You may have Mirrormade enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. So it's a clone for artifacts and enchantments. And if you have powerful artifacts and enchantments in your deck, it can be really strong. Mystic Study number 2, Smothering Tithe number 2. Both of these are really devastating if you copy it. But it says any artifact or enchantment, not just yours, meaning if your opponent casts a Smothering Tithe, you can use Mirrormade to get yourself a copy. And you can double your Doubling Season, you can double your Parallel Lives, another card that got reprinted. You can also copy the One Ring to reset it and get the fog effect back. It's so good. Mirrormade is awesome if you just have enchantments or artifacts that are powerful in your deck, and especially if you know your opponents commonly play powerful artifacts and enchantments. Being able to steal a copy of it can be really good. Alright, Syphon Mind is a card that has been printed a dozen times, and it is so good. I feel like not enough people play this card in Commander. Black and 3 for a sorcery. Each other player discards a card. You may draw a card for each card discarded this way. So 4 mana, draw 3, each opponent discards a card, with the caveat they had to have one in hand. If your opponent has no cards in hand to discard, you don't get to draw. So sometimes, if your opponents all have no cards in hand, it's useless. Although that scenario isn't super common, you don't need to be a discard deck for this to work though. Like, the amount of raw card advantage is ridiculous. Your opponents are collectively going -3 on cards and you're going +2? That's amazing card advantage. And it's like 30 cents. I think this is a staple for black decks, and I put it in all of my black decks. Here's a fun land, Arcane Lighthouse. It taps for a colorless, but you can also pay 1 and tap it, and until end of turn, creatures your opponents control lose Hexproof and Shroud, and can't have Hexproof or Shroud. Reprinted in Commander Masters at uncommon, yet it's still like a $3 card. This is one of those like weird cards that hasn't been reprinted that often or doesn't get reprinted that often, and it kind of just like always creeps up in price. And it's pretty good if you're in a meta where people really try to protect their commanders with the Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. This can easily, for 1 mana, shut them down, and then you can just Swords to Plowshares your opponent's commander. I really like it in decks like Mono Black or Mono Blue, where you might struggle to remove an artifact once it's on the board, like a Swiftfoot Boots, so this way it's another answer to get around those. And since it's an untapped land and the opportunity cost of playing this is pretty low, if you can afford another colorless utility land in your deck, maybe give it a try. Forsaken Monument is a 5 mana colorless legendary artifact. It gives colorless creatures you control +2/+2, and whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, add an additional colorless. Plus, whenever you cast a colorless spell, you gain 2 life. This card's $3 for its cheapest printing, and with the Commander Masters reprinting, it's probably going to stick around there for a little while longer. It's quite powerful though. It's a lot of text on 1 card. Obviously a super good staple for colorless decks, but I don't think you necessarily need to be a colorless deck to play this. If you're playing something like Psy Master Thopterist, buffing all your Thopters is pretty great, and you probably have a lot of artifacts, meaning you can trigger that gain 2 life ability often. And if you're in a monocolored deck, this makes any of your mana rocks that tap for a colorless tap for more mana. It also just straight up goes infinite with Basalt Monolith, so it's a nice easy combo to slot in if you're looking for that. Forsaken Monument, really powerful card, and if it doesn't get another reprint, I do expect the price to go up. Last card I want to talk about is another land, Waterlogged Grove. This is from the Modern Horizons Horizon Land cycle. It's a pain land for 1 of 2 colors, but you can also pay a generic tap it, sacrifice to draw a card. Waterlogged Grove is the only one of these that is below $5, and these lands are pretty good. In Commander, losing a life here or there is kind of negligible, and in the late game, this can just be a cantrip. You play it for 0 mana and you spend 1 to crack it and draw another card. You're probably not going to even need to lose that much life from it. How often do you actually fully tap out every single turn? You might have 7 lands in play and just cast a 6-drop and leave this one open. I think this whole cycle is really good. I recommend picking up copies of them where you can. But this is the cheapest one, and if you're in Simic, you probably got extra lands anyway, so why not have one that draws a card? Alright, so those were my picks for October. I think that the Wilds of Eldraine reprints have been phenomenal and are really awesome for Commander players looking to pick up some of those cards, and even some of the ones that are not less than $5 are still pretty good, and a lot of things have just dropped in price. I really hope they do more of these Mystical Archive type reprints in standard sets, because it just tanks the price of a lot of these. But what are some other $5 or less cards that you would recommend? Let me know in the comments below. And also let me know if you saw anything here that you're going to pick up for your Commander deck. I'd love to hear it. Thank you so very much for watching. Subscribe for more.